Hello, everybody. My name is Benny Corona. I will be giving you this presentation on sustainable agriculture today. I also want to mention before I begin that I'm very happy to do this. It's a topic I'm very passionate about. I come from an agriculture based community, so sustainable solutions to improve the quality of life for these communities is very important to me. I feel like we've been able to do some good work in the last couple of years, and obviously very hopeful for what we can do in the future. And also, it's a very beautiful full circle moment for me. Not too long ago, I was a UC Berkeley student, so it's very cool for me to now return and contribute to a class that's working on so much good for the future of our communities and our generation. So we'll start off with this brief outline of what the presentation is going to look like. Obviously, we'll start off with the introduction, introducing myself, the work that I do, and how I got to this point. We're going to give a brief background on agriculture. We're going to give a conversation about climate change impact on agriculture. We're going to talk about how sustainable agriculture can help us mitigate climate change. We'll also talk about agriculture labor workers and or farm workers, because this is a sector of agriculture that is often erased from political and policy conversations because it's a very vulnerable group, and we're not about to do that in this presentation. We're also going to talk about the current political and policy landscape surrounding sustainable agriculture, and then we'll end with a conclusion. Introduction. So as you know, my name is Benny Corona. I am a former farm worker. I've been working as a farm worker on and off for 17 years. I spent the majority of my life as a farm worker. I started working in elementary school with my parents, and it's actually a very common practice for children of first generation Mexican immigrants to accompany their parents at working in the fields. This sort of experience pushed me to pursue education as a way to improve my quality of life, but also change the circumstances of the communities where I am from. So education and knowledge are power, and I hope by the end of this presentation I can show how you can leverage your UC Berkeley education and policy knowledge and expertise to be the change you want to see in the world. I have worked in public service outside of my work as an agriculture worker. Now I currently work in state government, advancing the policies that I care about to improve the quality of life for communities that I'm most passionate about. So some background on agriculture. What is it? So there's a lot of different definitions for agriculture, but I like this one because it's very short and sweet. So agriculture is the art and science of cultivating the soil, growing crops, and raising livestock. There's evidence that the first farms were built about 12,000 years ago, and this was crucial for the evolution of humanity because it took us from hunter-gatherers to an organized society that eventually skyrocketed into the digital age that we are in right now. And I would not be doing justice to this policy issue if I was not talking about the Central Valley in California, where we have the most productive agricultural region in the country, and some of us argue the world. So Central Valley agriculture. If you didn't know, agriculture and food related services contribute over $1 trillion to the US GDP. More than 215 different crops are grown in the Central Valley alone. And although it only represents 1% of the US farmland, the Central Valley produces 1/4 of the nation's food, including 40% of the nation's fruits, nuts, and other table foods. So how is climate change impacting agriculture and ag-based communities? Well, it's no surprise to anybody, I assume, that the heat waves are getting worse because of global warming. Multiple daily heat records have already been broken this summer alone. And the IPCC has already shown evidence that the more intense and longer the heat waves is the more intense and longer heat waves are directly attributed to human-induced climate change. And the way that these heat waves impact ag-based communities is it really endangers the lives of farm workers. and farmers and people that are working out in the heat. It also prevents farmers from being able to grow certain crops, and it kills certain crops. There's farmers that can't grow certain temperatures anymore because it stays too hot too long nowadays. Climate change is also intensifying and worsening the California water droughts. As the IPCC has shown, climate change is leading to drier seasons, which leads to less water availability for our farms. By 2050, yields are projected to decline by 40% for avocados and 20% for almonds, table grapes, oranges, and walnuts. And we already projected that California alone is going to lose up to 1 million acres of farmland by 2030. We also have, because of these water droughts, infrastructure that is crumbling from overpumping, divestment, and competing interests for California's water. Lastly, climate change is worsening the air quality in our communities. Agriculture-based communities like the Central Valley already have some of the worst air quality in the country. Climate change is only making that worse with the wildfires and increasing greenhouse gas emissions that get stuck in our valley's geography. And this is already resulting in ag-based communities having some of the worst public health outcomes in California, including higher asthma rates and valley fever. And this is just a map I thought was very impressive that shows the impact of wildfires in California and the western United States. And all that purple and red is basically hazardous air quality that can damage your lungs and your body's health permanently. So how does sustainable agriculture deal with a lot of these, help us deal with these issues? Well, first, let's try to understand what agriculture, the link between agriculture and climate change. Agriculture represents over 10% of all U.S. greenhouse gas emissions by the economic sector. 13% of global greenhouse gas emissions are due to agriculture. This makes the agriculture sector the second largest emitter after the energy sector. The widespread use of chemicals like pesticides also have detrimental impacts on our environment, our water quality, and the public health of surrounding communities. So how does sustainable agriculture change this? What is it? Sustainable agriculture, again, there's a lot of different definitions for this, but one is it's a long-term conscious approach to agriculture that seeks to meet society's food and textile needs in the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their needs. Every person involved in the food system, farm workers, farmers, processors, consumers, we can all play a role in ensuring a sustainable agriculture system. So sustainable agriculture can mean a lot of different things. It does mean a lot of different things to different people. But for the sake of this presentation, I brought it down to 3 main points and a 4th main point that we'll get into later in the presentation. But simply, sustainable agriculture, to me, promotes soil and public health. It mitigates climate change, and it supports ag-based communities and their economies. Sustainable agriculture is soil and public health conscious. So soil health practices like compost, conservation tillage, cover crops, crop livestock integration, and others lead to a reduction in non-use of pesticides and other chemicals harmful to human and environmental health. Healthy soils can store more carbon and promote drought-resistant lands. And lastly, unsustainable farming practices have led to a massive loss in organic soil content, which lowers productivity of farms and threatens the longevity of our farmland. So how can sustainable agriculture and farmland help us reduce emissions? Well, for some context, 40% of the US landscape is farmland. That's over 900 million acres of land. And soil is actually the world's largest terrestrial carbon sink. So if we implement soil practices, if all the farmland in the US implemented soil practices, healthy soils practices, we'd have a very vibrant and powerful tool to reduce greenhouse gas emissions when the soil captures carbon from the atmosphere, puts it in the soil, and keeps it there for environmental and public health benefits. Thirdly, sustainable agriculture supports the long-term bottom line of ag-based communities. Obviously, food equals life. Food security is also part of national security. And with an increase in population growth that's projected to come, that results in increased demand for food. And obviously, I, like many others, want our communities to be healthy and to have access to fruits and vegetables, which is going to increase a demand for the production of ag-based communities. So we need to invest in farmers who need technical assistance and financial support to transform their farms and move away from unsustainable practices. One reason unsustainable practices exist is because it's a short-term way to make a profit. The use of chemicals, groundwater, uh, growing water wasting crops, and using gas-powered heavy machinery. And lastly, a sustainable agriculture supports farm workers. And this is a very moving picture that I wanted to share that sort of shows the power that Central Valley agriculture workers have and the power that the region has. This is just one of many trips this farm worker will make to ensure that we have food products like grapes in our food tables, in our dinner tables, excuse me. So lastly, sustainable agriculture invests in farm workers. We were trying to do this with AB 125, an assembly bill led by Assemblymember Robert Rebus, which has a provision of investing 165 million in farm worker safety and well-being for the year of 2021 to 2022. So that's one way that we are trying to use sustainable agriculture bills uh, to ensure equity and better public health outcomes for our farm worker communities. Other things society can do to support farm workers, this leads into federal policy, immigration reform, healthcare for all, securing clean drinking water for all. There's a million people in California without clean drinking water right now in their faucets. A lot of those are the farm workers that are responsible for the food in our dinner tables. So what's going on with sustainable agricultural policy right now? Well, there's a number of organizations championing this issue. One is the California Climate and Agriculture Network, Mad Agriculture based out of Colorado, Carbon 180 based out of Washington, D.C. And actually, we'll get into this in not this slide, but the next one. California is actually leading the change. So, a goal that we have to promote sustainable agriculture is ultimately increasing the use of farms using soil health practices like no-till, crop rotation, reduced till, cover crops, among others. And this is just an awesome graph that one of my colleagues, who was also a UC Berkeley student not too long ago, made representing the number of U.S. farms using these different soil health practices. So, for example, 13.7% of farms are using no-till. 7.5% of farms are using cover crops. And the way that the federal government is trying to promote these practices is through acts like the Agricultural Resilience Act that increases investments in soil health practices for farmers. It protects existing farmland. It increases funding for USDA rural programs like Energy for America, among others. And what I'm most excited about is talking about how California is leading the way when it comes to sustainable agriculture. And actually, this is part of I worked for the administration while I was in grad school as well. So it has a sort of a happy feeling for me. But the way that California is leading is with the California Healthy Soils Program. So this is the only program of its kind in the country. It's investing solely to give farmers the financial resources and incentives to implement soil health practices and take carbon from the atmosphere and put it in the soil. Over $20 million has already been used to reduce over 76,000 metric tons of carbon dioxide. Obviously, we're trying to increase that. And this year, Governor Newsom signed a $1.1 billion sustainable ag package signed into law, which will increase the Healthy Soils program from 75 to 75 million for this coming year and 85 million for the year after that. It also included other sustainable agriculture provisions like 17 million in technical assistance for farmers, 15 million for farm to community food hubs, among other sustainable agriculture provisions. And if people are interested, I can share that addendum. You can also Google it, the Governor's Sustainable Agriculture Financial Package Addendum. But basically, hopefully, with this program, it's already been a proven winner. We've exhausted all the grants for this program. Farmers have been using them and implementing the funding to help mitigate climate change and reduce carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. And hopefully, it serves as a model for other states, and eventually this reaches federal mainstream implementation, which is the hope, because then we can really bring down the number of greenhouse gas emissions in the atmosphere. So the conclusion, I personally do not think about the climate crisis in the sense that the climate is out of our control. The science about climate change has been very clear for decades. I think about it as a political crisis because it's human induced, which means humans have changed it, which also means humans can change it again, and we can be that change. Sustainable agriculture and carbon sequestration are powerful tools to combat climate change, and here in California, we're leading that way forward. And lastly, I want to invite you all to be the change you want to see in the world. As a former farm worker, as someone that is now working on sustainable agriculture and wants to help mitigate climate change for my future and the future of my younger siblings, I never thought in a million years I'd be doing this kind of work and helping pass legislation, $1.1 billion in sustainable agriculture funding. I mean, that's a crazy number that I never thought I'd be influencing in any capacity, but here we are. And so I want to invite you to be the change you want to see in the world. And as we say in my community, sí se puede.